I'm at my sewing machine. I'm going to stitch down the sashes. I use a stitch length of 3.5 to 4. I have my point drops tool and I have my button reed. I'm going to use both of these to show you how they work. My materials in place, my centerpiece, and remember, I'm going to start sewing in the middle. I'll show you why at the very end. What I like to do before I begin is put my needle down and bring my bobbin thread up. I do that by holding onto my needle thread, and the bobbin thread usually pops up. As I approach this one beveled edge, I leave the side that's leading to it flat, and I turn under the underside. And then I simply fold the sash up and the beveled edge folds neatly into place. But I don't always trust it, so I plant my needle and I pivot and I observe the beveled edge. If I don't like it, I'll take my paint dropper and kind of tease some of the fabric out if it seems like it's bowing in. Then I stitch down and I try to stitch back as well. So I backstitch this. If you can backstitch, that's what I recommend. If you have to plant and pivot, you might need to use the button reed when you get to the exposed corners. Now's the time where I evaluate the depth of my sash. I think that looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this. If you're going to plant your needle and pivot, you're going to need your button reed. So my needle is planted at the very end of my project. I'm going to flip it around, and if I put my presser foot down, you'll see that it's at a slight angle. That risks catching the needle on the presser foot or something else on the very back here and producing stitches that skip. So I'm going to use this to prop up the back of my presser foot. It doesn't need to come up very high, so I'm going to use the smaller of the two surfaces. You use whichever one's appropriate. So with the needle still in the fabric, I raise my presser foot. This slot on the button reed goes surrounding the needle so that there's room to stitch, and then I lower my presser foot and sew. Just one note, hold on to the button reed. It very often flies off the back if you don't keep a hand on it. When I began sewing, I started in the middle of the sash. I did that to allow room to turn under the final beveled edge. I like to tuck in my thread tails. So when I'm at this position, I take the bobbin thread and I pull on it so that I bring both the bobbin thread and the needle thread to the area behind the sash, and I tuck it there before I finish sewing the sashes in place. It's just a really strange thing I do, and that way I have less threads to tuck in. I sometimes even leave a little hanging out so I can give it a good tug as I approach it. This is how the completed sashing looks from the right side, and this is the wrong side.